Good evening, my friend. Welcome to this quiet corner of the night, where the world slows down and time begins to blur. I'm so glad you've joined me. Whether you're winding down from a long day, resting weary eyes, or simply searching for a peaceful way to fall asleep. Tonight, I'll be telling you a story. A very old story. Not one of heroes or battles, not of thunder or fire, but one of change, of how something small, something unseen, crept quietly across the world, and how it shifted the course of kingdoms, faith, and everyday life forever. It's the story of a plague, but told gently, slowly, like a candle flickering in the dark of history. And you don't need to stay awake to remember it all. Just let it wash over you like a bedtime breeze, soft and unhurried. If you enjoy these quiet wanderings through time, I'd love for you to tap the like button or subscribe so you won't miss the next story. It always amazes me how many of you are listening from different parts of the world. Some from small towns in the Midwest, others from quiet coastal homes in New England, and even a few from faraway places I've never been. So, if you're comfortable, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Just a comment below, like a little message in a bottle. Now, find that cozy spot. Let the blanket gently settle over you. Take a slow, deep breath. And another. Let your shoulders fall heavy, your jaw unclench, your eyes grow soft and slow. You're safe here. This time is only for you. Let's take a little journey now. Far away from electric clocks and noisy roads. We're drifting back to the 14th century. You've just woken up. The straw beneath your back rustles as you shift. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and wet stone. A distant rooster calls out, muffled by the thick fog outside your shuttered window. You rise slowly, wrapping a rough wool cloak around your shoulders. It's cold. The hearth's embers are barely glowing. Outside, the streets are unusually quiet. A thin mist hangs low, clinging to the crooked rooftops. You're not sure why, but something feels different. The baker hasn't opened his stall today. The cobbler's door is still closed. And the church bell hasn't rung. You are a weaver, or perhaps a merchant, maybe even a friar. Your life is simple, humble, and guided by the rhythms of the land, the church, and the village square. But something unseen has begun to move across the land. Not a soldier's march, but something slower, stranger. A sickness. And tonight, we'll follow its path. We'll wander softly from one corner of the world to the next, to see how this invisible guest reshaped kingdoms, emptied cities, and gave birth to something new. But for now, don't worry about what comes next. Just listen, and let the story begin. The story of the plague begins quietly, as so many great changes do. It did not arrive with a trumpet's call or a warrior's cry. It came instead in silence, carried on the backs of merchants, hidden in the fur of rats, too small to be seen, too early to be feared. Before it had a name, it was just a rumor. A shadow whispered about in busy ports and smoky taverns. A strange sickness, they said, spreading far in the east, a fever here, a swollen lump there. But such things had come and gone before. Most dismissed it with a shrug and a sip of wine. The world of the 14th century moved slowly. Villages slept beneath thatched roofs, cities bustled with wooden carts and wandering dogs, and the tallest towers were still built by hand, stone by stone. Kings ruled with divine right. Peasants tilled the same soil their fathers had worked, and monks copied prayers by candlelight in cold, silent monasteries. Life was hard, but predictable. There was hunger, yes, and winter chills and backbreaking labor. But there was also rhythm, the turning of seasons, the tolling of bells, the comfort of repetition. And then the rhythm broke. The Black Death, as we now call it, first arrived in Europe in the year 1347. But it had begun its journey far earlier. Perhaps in the steppes of Central Asia, or along the trade routes that threaded through China, India, and the Middle East. No one knew exactly where it started. But once it began to move, nothing could stop it. It was not just a sickness of the body, but of the world itself. It crept into the cracks of society, exposing the fragility of kingdoms, the imbalance of power, the quiet despair of the poor. It touched every soul, from shepherds on distant hills to kings in marble halls. And when it passed, the world it left behind was not the same. But let us not rush. There's no need to hurry through this story. We'll walk gently, candle in hand, through these forgotten corridors of time. And perhaps, as your eyes begin to flutter closed, you'll catch glimpses of lives once lived. Simple, quiet lives, not so different from your own. And so, tonight we begin with a whisper that crossed oceans and mountains, a whisper that changed everything. Let's drift now to a warm autumn day, where sails rise on the horizon, and an unfamiliar silence settles over the port. The sea is calm today. Its surface glimmers in the afternoon sun, broken only by the soft creak of ropes and the gentle slosh of wooden hulls nudging against the dock. In the port of Constantinople, merchants go about their business, selling bundles of dyed cloth, olive oil sealed in earthen jars, and spices that smell of distant sun-baked lands. And yet, there's something in the air. Not just the salt and smoke, but something more subtle. Attention! A question. You hear it whispered in the shadow of a sail. Have you heard about the sickness in Kaffa? They say whole caravans have vanished in the east. A fever, and then black spots, and then nothing. No one says it too loudly. Not yet. You lean against a wooden post, your hands rough from weeks of sea travel. The sun is beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the dock. Nearby, a boy sits sharpening a knife with slow, patient strokes. A sailor dozes beside a crate of dates, his mouth slightly open. All around you, life carries on as it always has. And yet, the whispers keep drifting in, carried not just by voices, but by sails, by letters, by weary travelers returning home with haunted eyes. Far to the east, in places most Europeans have only heard about in legend, through Persia, along the dusty Silk Road, past cities with domes of gold. Something is moving. Not an army, not a storm, something quieter, but just as unstoppable. In the city of Tabriz, they say the dead are left unburied. In Baghdad, prayer fills the air day and night, thick as incense. In the oasis towns beyond Samarkand, merchants arrive with fewer camels than they left with. But what is sickness to a kingdom? To a port filled with gold and grain? To a world that has known famines and fires, kings and crusades? Most still believe it will pass. Just another tale from far away. Just wind and rumor. You pass by a group of older traders seated near the tavern door. They speak softly in many tongues, Greek, Italian, Arabic, their words blending into a quiet current of concern. One of them looks up as you approach and says, in a voice not unkind, "Keep your hands clean, traveler." That's what they say now. And don't touch the sick. You nod, and move on. That evening, the port dims under a lavender sky. The stars begin to blink one by one, as oil lamps flicker to life behind wooden shutters. A soft wind rises from the sea, carrying the scent of fish, salt, and wet rope. Somewhere, a lute plays a gentle, melancholy tune. You lie down near the warehouse, wrapped in your wool cloak, the wood beneath you still warm from the day's sun. The sky is clear, but your thoughts are not. What was it they said? A sickness? Black boils? Something about Genoese sailors trapped in a fortress? You can't quite recall. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just one more tale, spun from the stress of too much travel and too little sleep. You let your eyes close slowly. Somewhere far beyond the sea, a ship is setting sail. Its hull creaks with the weight of grain. And something else. Something small. Alive. Unseen. And as that ship moves quietly westward, so too does the story. As the candle burned low, the story quietly moved on. The sea is unusually still. In the harbor of Messina, Sicily, the waters glisten like glass beneath the early morning sun. A soft mist curls between the ships, and somewhere in the distance, a gull calls lazily over the bay. The cobbled streets are still wet with dew. A woman sweeps her doorstep with slow, practiced strokes. A baker stirs his oven's embers, and the scent of rising dough mixes with the salt air. It is the year 1347, and though no one quite knows it yet, something has arrived. A ship glides silently into the harbor. Its sails sag, heavy and worn. The flags it flies are tattered. The dockworkers glance up. Something feels odd. No laughter from the crew. No singing. Just silence, broken only by the groaning of ropes and the creaking of wood. The ship comes from the east. From the Black Sea, from Kaffa, where not long ago, a siege had taken place. But siege stories are common in these times. Just one more squabble between merchants, empires, and chance. The sailors aboard are pale. Some lie slumped on the deck. Others huddle together, wrapped in cloaks even though the day is warm. The dockmaster frowns. He's seen ships come in under storms after pirate raids, with cargo spoiled and sails torn. But never like this. They unload only a few crates. No crowd gathers. The air around the ship seems heavier somehow, and the usual laughter and shouting of the dock fade into hushes and murmurs. Within days, the first bodies appear in the streets of Messina. A boy just 12 found curled near a well. An old woman, once the town's midwife, slumped beneath the church's bell tower. Then 3 men, dockhands, each with dark, swollen lumps beneath their arms and necks. Fevered, trembling, and soon still. But even now there is no panic. Just confusion. Just that same soft question passed from one doorway to the next. Have you heard? Is it a poison? A punishment? Whispers drift from candlelit homes. Some say the sailors brought it. Others blame the wind or the well water or even the night air. Physicians arrive, draped in long robes and carrying pouches of herbs. They prescribe bleeding, hot compresses, prayers. They write letters to Florence and Pisa, asking if similar signs have been seen. But no clear answer returns. Only silence. You wander the narrow streets, hands tucked in your sleeves. The shutters are drawn on homes where there used to be laughter. Laundry lines sag with unmoved cloth. Even the cats, usually bold and sleek, move more slowly now, as if they too sense something has shifted. In the town square, the market has grown quiet. The cheese vendor hasn't come for 2 days. The man who sells figs has taken ill, they say, though no one knows for sure. A priest walks by, his voice low as he blesses a cart pulled by 2 tired oxen. It carries a bundle wrapped in linen. The bells ring more often now. Not for weddings, not for feasts, but for funerals. And still no one uses the word plague. Not yet. The days grow shorter. The air takes on that crispness of approaching winter. And with it, something settles over Messina, something heavier than the fog, quieter than the sea. In the evenings, candles burn longer. People speak in hushed tones near their doorsteps, their eyes flicking down the alleyways. And then, slowly, the sickness moves on. From Messina to Palermo. From Palermo to the mainland. To Genoa. To Venice. To the cities of marble and music and gold. But it moves not like a warhorse charging into battle. It moves like breath on glass. Quiet. Soft. Unstoppable. In Florence, the poets begin to write of strange symptoms. In Paris, scholars debate the positions of the stars. In London, still untouched, sailors hear the tales and shrug. It is far from us. It will pass. It always does. But it does not. Not this time. You may already be drifting off, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need to remember these names or these dates. Just let your mind rest in these quiet streets of old. Imagine the slow turning of time, the ripple of disease moving across parchment maps, the creak of wagons bearing herbs and bread and linen, the whispered prayers of those who did not yet understand. Some believe the sickness was sent by God, a punishment for greed, for pride, for war. Others think it is the result of foul air, corrupted by swamps and bad winds. A few whisper of poison in wells, or conspiracies hidden in the night. No one guesses that it is spread by something so small, so ordinary. A flea, riding quietly in the fur of a rat, tucked beneath a grain sack, asleep in the dark hold of a ship. The very things that brought prosperity, trade, connection, exploration, are now the very things that carry death. But still there is no great scream. No single moment where the world says, now everything changes. It's more like snow falling in the night. Quiet, gentle, until you wake, and the world outside your door is white and still and unrecognizable. You watch from your window as a cart passes, pulled by a pale mule. The man driving it wears a scarf over his mouth. In the back of the cart, a few shapes covered in cloth. You look away. You sip warm broth. You add another log to the fire. You hold your rosary a little longer before bed. Because what else can you do? The night grows long. The stars above Messina seem dimmer somehow. But even now, even with this new fear brushing the edge of every thought, there is calm. There is silence. And sleep. Because life has always gone on, through fire, through storm, through plague. The seasons will still turn. The wheat will still rise. And for now, you are still here. Breathing softly, wrapped in warmth, beneath a quiet sky. Let's drift now. From this Sicilian port to another shore. Where the story, slow and steady, begins to unfold once more. The morning mist hangs low over Florence. A stillness lingers in the alleys, the kind that makes your footsteps sound louder than they are. You walk slowly past shuttered windows and wooden doors that seem to breathe, expanding gently in the cool air. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer strikes once, twice, then falls quiet. Even that familiar rhythm fades quickly into silence. You draw your cloak tighter. The autumn air is crisp, almost fragrant with fallen leaves and the faint scent of lavender from a nearby garden. You pause at a fountain in the square. Water still bubbles gently from the stone lion's mouth, clear and cold. Pigeons flutter nearby, but do not coo. Even they seem to sense something has changed. Florence had always been a city of sound, of merchants calling from their stalls, of horses clattering over stone, of voices rising in laughter and arguments alike. Now it is muffled, muted, as if wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. The sickness has arrived. It didn't come all at once. No, it crept. A merchant's wife fell ill first, they say. Her skin turned pale, her eyes hollow. She burned with fever. Then her throat swelled, and dark swellings appeared under her arms. Within 3 days she was gone. Then her children, her neighbors, the butcher on her street. Physicians murmured to each other in dim candlelight. They carried no answers, only guesses. They came in their long robes and odd-beaked masks filled with sweet-smelling herbs, but still they kept their distance. Many of them left the city soon after. Some never returned. You continue walking, past a bakery where no bread is baking. The windows are dark. Dust has gathered on the wooden sill. You remember the baker's laugh, his habit of slipping small rolls to children when their mothers weren't looking. That was just weeks ago. Now, the air in front of the shop hangs heavy with absence. In the wealthier districts, silence is even deeper. The villas sit behind tall walls and iron gates. Curtains remain drawn. Some say entire households vanished in a matter of days, servants and masters alike. The plague, it seems, does not care for titles. A cart creaks by. Slowly. The mule's hooves thud dully on the stone. The driver says nothing. In the back lie 2 figures, wrapped in linen. Their outlines are faint. Their journey is one of many. There is no destination, only a place beyond the city walls where the earth has been dug. You pause at the corner of a small chapel. A woman kneels outside its locked doors, praying aloud in broken Italian. Her voice is soft, almost song-like. She clutches a rosary. Around her neck hangs a pouch of herbs. She doesn't look up as you pass. Inside your lodging, candles burn all day now. Not for light, but for comfort. The flames flicker as something to watch, to hold your gaze on when the quiet becomes too loud. The window remains cracked, just a little. Some say fresh air keeps the illness away. Others say it invites it in. Time passes strangely now. Day and night blend. The sun rises, but without bells or bustle. It feels more like an afterthought. Meals are simpler, if they come at all. Bread, broth, a little wine. You eat with your hands, slowly, thoughtfully. Every bite is savored. In the evenings, stories begin to pass between those still left. They say Venice has closed its gates. In Genoa, priests walk the streets with crosses held high. In Milan, families are sealed inside their homes at the first sign of illness. No one knows what is true. The stories float like dust in a shaft of light, visible but untouchable. You sit by the hearth and listen to your host's voice, low and steady. He speaks of days long past, of his youth in the countryside. He does not mention the present. Neither do you. Outside, a dog howls once, then stops. You recall the markets in their fullness, bright bolts of cloth, the sweet sting of vinegar and oil, the fresh figs piled high. Laughter, haggling, and children darting between legs. That world feels distant now, like a dream you woke from weeks ago. In some streets, red crosses are painted on doors. Here lies the ill. Here, do not enter. But even those warnings fade with time. When entire blocks go silent, when the last candle goes out, there are no hands left to mark the doors. Still, there are those who remain. The midwives, the gravediggers, the friars who walk barefoot, singing psalms through cracked lips. They move through the city not with fear, but with a kind of practiced grace. You see one such man give a crust of bread to a child sitting alone on a step. He places it gently in her hand, then continues on, his eyes cast downward. The bells still ring, though not as often, and when they do it is long and low and slow. Not a call to gather, but a call to remember. Each evening, as you lie beneath your woolen blanket, you watch the flicker of the candle on your ceiling. Its light dances across the beams, soft and golden. The air smells faintly of rosemary. You breathe slowly, deeply. You are still here, still breathing. In the silence of the city, something strange takes root, a kind of peace. Not peace from joy or triumph, but peace in endurance. In breath, in quietness. The stars still shine above Florence. The Arno still flows. The hills beyond the city walls remain green. Life somehow still stirs in small ways. A cat curls on a rooftop, purring. A child sings to herself in a garden. A man repairs his shoe by lamplight, his fingers steady. And you sleep. Or try to. Your dreams come softer now. Slower. Like pages turning in a forgotten book. Sometimes you dream of laughter. Of open fields. Of your mother's hands washing linens in the river. As the night deepens, Florence grows stiller. A hush wraps around the stones, the shutters, the lanterns. Even the wind moves gently now, as if whispering lullabies to the empty streets. You pull your blanket higher. The flame lowers. Your eyes grow heavy. And elsewhere in the kingdom, the story moves on. It's a cool, overcast morning in Avignon. The clouds press low against the rooftops, soft and dull like unwashed wool. You open your eyes to the smell of damp earth and old wood, and the distant echo of a church bell tolling slowly. One long note that seems to stretch across the gray sky. You're staying in the upstairs room of a modest inn near the River Rhone. The shutters are half closed, and through the slats, a faint silvery light filters in, just enough to reveal the worn wooden beams above your head and the faint silhouette of a wooden crucifix on the wall. You stretch quietly beneath your blanket. The straw-stuffed mattress creaks beneath you. You don't rush to rise. There's no reason to, no appointments, no markets, no chatter in the streets below. Avignon has fallen quiet. The air carries a scent of mildew and cloves. The clove scent comes from the sachet your host placed under your pillow. He believes it keeps the illness at bay. Maybe he's right. Maybe not. But you appreciate the effort. It smells safe. You rise slowly, pulling on your woolen tunic and stepping into your worn shoes. The innkeeper has left a small basin of water and a cloth. You dip the cloth in and wipe your face. The water is cold but not sharp. It clears the fog from your mind. You hear the rustle of birds' wings outside the window, and for a moment, imagine they're messengers from a time before all this. Downstairs, a thin porridge steams gently in a clay bowl. The innkeeper's wife offers it with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Her hands are red from scrubbing, her sleeves still damp. She says nothing, and you say nothing in return. Outside, the town feels like it's holding its breath. You step into the narrow street and walk carefully between puddles. The cobblestones glisten with last night's drizzle. Nearby, an apothecary's door creaks open, and a pale figure leans out to hang a small cloth pouch on the handle. Another charm, another hope. No carts roll by. No voices call out. But there are sounds if you listen. The soft drip of water from a rooftop, the flutter of fabric from an abandoned stall, the light scurry of small feet, rats, darting between barrels and walls, always busy, always watching. You walk past a statue of the Virgin Mary in a wall niche, her face weathered but serene. Someone has placed a bundle of thyme at her feet. The scent rises faintly, a silent prayer offered not with fanfare but with quiet hands. Avignon had once been a city of grandeur. Not long ago, the Pope himself lived here. Cardinals, bishops, scribes, all walked these same streets. The city hummed with business and ceremony. Robes of crimson and gold sweeping over marble thresholds. Latin chants echoing through stone cathedrals. Now those same robes hang in wardrobes untouched, and the cathedrals echo only with wind. You wander toward the Pont Saint-Benezet, the old bridge reaching out into the Rhone. It doesn't go all the way across anymore. Part of it collapsed in a flood years ago, and no one ever rebuilt it. People say it's a bridge to nowhere now. But today, it feels like a perfect place to stand and watch the slow-moving water. The river doesn't seem to know about the plague. It flows constant and calm. Birds skim its surface, and reeds sway along its edges. A fisherman's boat is tied to a post nearby, but there is no fisherman. Just the empty vessel, bobbing gently, patiently. You lean on the cool stone railing of the bridge and close your eyes. Farther upstream, someone is burning rosemary. The smoke curls through the air, fragrant and thin. It mixes with the river breeze, and for a moment, the world feels ancient and holy. You think of the stories you've heard, of towns emptied overnight, of entire monasteries lost to silence, of the rats. Ah, the rats! They are everywhere now, small, clever creatures darting between shadows, their dark eyes alert. At first, no one noticed them. They were simply part of the city's backdrop, as they always had been. But over time, their numbers grew. And with them came the fleas. The little things that no one saw, that clung to fur and cloth, that burrowed beneath skin and brought with them a sickness as old as the earth. Most people still do not understand this. They blame the stars or the sinners or the air itself. But the truth, whispered only among the learned, points to the rats. You see one now, peeking from behind a barrel. Its whiskers twitch. It doesn't run. It simply watches you. You nod almost respectfully and walk on. Near the town square, you come upon a gathering. Not a crowd, no one crowds anymore, but a few townsfolk, standing at a distance looking up. A friar stands on the steps of the church, his arms outstretched. He sings, not a sermon, but a soft hymn, one you remember from your childhood. The notes rise gently, curling into the air like smoke. Ave Maria. The people do not sing with him. They simply watch, their faces lifted like sunflowers seeking warmth. A few kneel. A child clutches his mother's hand. An old man crosses himself. And when the song ends, no one claps. They simply nod and drift away. In a nearby alley, a woman sweeps the stones in front of her home. Her motions are slow, rhythmic, almost meditative. The street is already clean, but she continues. Perhaps it's the movement that matters. The act of doing something. Of pushing back in some small way against the stillness. You pass a schoolhouse. The windows are boarded now, the door sealed. A chalkboard still stands inside, barely visible through a crack. Faint writing remains. Lecken, les saisons de l'année. The seasons of the year. You smile softly. Time still turns, even when everything else stands still. Somewhere beyond the city, wheat continues to grow. Trees stretch upward. The world continues its gentle turning. You wander toward the edge of town, where fields stretch into the horizon. A few workers move slowly through the rows, harvesting herbs. They wear scarves around their faces. They do not speak, but the lavender still grows, its scent sweet and thick in the morning air. A black cat winds its way between your legs. You kneel and offer your hand. It presses its head against your fingers, purring. You scratch behind its ears and whisper something soft. The cat stays with you as you return to the inn. The sky is beginning to darken. Not quite evening, but the kind of dim that makes shadows stretch longer. The innkeeper nods as you enter. A small fire crackles in the hearth. Bread and cheese wait on the table. You eat slowly, listening to the creak of the wood, the pop of the flame. Upstairs, in your room, you light a single candle. The room fills with warm, golden light. The clove sachet still rests beneath your pillow. You lie back, staring at the ceiling beams, tracing their lines with your eyes. Outside, the wind stirs the trees gently. The rats still scurry. The stars begin to appear. You close your eyes. The city may be quiet. The world may be changed. But you are still here, breathing, dreaming, alive. And somewhere, just outside the city walls, the story moves quietly on. The air inside the apothecary's shop is dense and fragrant, like a living memory. You step through the crooked wooden door and are immediately enveloped by the scent of dried rose petals, vinegar, lavender, and something darker, something musky and earthen, like damp roots pulled fresh from soil. The light is dim. Thin beams of sun filter through panes of bubbled glass, illuminating floating motes of dust that drift as slowly as thoughts before sleep. A bell above the door jingles softly as you enter, but no one speaks. You wait in the stillness. Behind the counter, a tall, thin man emerges from a back room. His robe is deep green and belted with a leather sash heavy with tools, tongs, scissors, glass vials. His beard is long and gray, with streaks of white like cobwebs in early frost. His eyes are steady but tired. He doesn't greet you with words. Instead, he gestures to the chair near the hearth, and you sit. The fire crackles softly. He returns to a shelf and removes a small jar of crushed chamomile, then another of mint. Each motion is deliberate, unhurried. This is not a place of rushing. The apothecary is a sanctuary in a world now ruled by silence and worry. Beneath the floorboards, you hear a creak, the soft patter of a cat's paws. Perhaps two. They keep the rats away, or so the apothecary believes. He feeds them bits of dried fish, and calls them by names you don't quite catch. But he speaks to them gently, with the same reverence he gives his jars. Outside, the city of Toulouse lies uneasy. The streets are neither full nor empty. People still walk them, but their paths are cautious and brief. Cloaks are drawn tight. Faces covered in linen. Hands tucked into sleeves. In here, however, time bends differently. The apothecary places a bundle of dried herbs into a bowl, lavender, sage, thyme, and pours hot water over them. Steam rises, curling like incense. He places the bowl before you and gestures for you to breathe. You do. The warmth enters your lungs slowly, gently. The scent is calming, the heat comforting. You feel your shoulders drop just a little. The shop is filled with whispers, not from mouths, but from labels on bottles, from the rustling of dried leaves, from memory itself. He begins to speak. Not of death or illness, but of plants. He tells you of elderberries gathered at the edge of the forest, soaked in honey and wine. Of garlic grown in sunlit patches behind the monastery wall, crushed and wrapped in linen. Of rosehips harvested just after the first frost, their redness like fire in the hands. You don't need to remember every word. It flows past you, warm and soft. The history of plants is its own quiet language, and he has spent his life listening to it. He speaks of roots that know the seasons better than any almanac, of leaves that tell time by turning their edges, of bark that remembers storms. You sip a cup of warm infusion he offers. It tastes of anise and orange peel, with a hint of clove. The warmth travels all the way to your fingertips. As he works, he crushes herbs in a mortar with slow, circular movements. The sound is steady, like a distant drum echoing across fields. You watch entranced. He speaks of distillation, of collecting dew from the leaves of nettles, of mixing vinegar with ash to ward off fever. There is no rush. The apothecary pauses occasionally to listen to the fire or to the distant bell of the cathedral, which tolls now only once per hour, fewer and fainter with each passing day. He tells you that even the city's bell ringers have taken ill, that sometimes now the bell rings late, or not at all. He smiles softly when he says this, not from amusement, but from resignation. He offers you a poultice wrapped in linen, still warm from the hearth. For your chest, he says. To sleep better. You nod. Even if you aren't ill, the comfort of warm cloth and herbal steam is welcome. You stay longer than you intended. In the corner, a young apprentice grinds dried petals into powder, his hands moving with practiced care. He is perhaps 15, with wide eyes and a quiet demeanor. He doesn't speak either, but he watches everything, learning through silence, through repetition. The apothecary teaches without lectures. A gesture, a pause, a nod, and the apprentice mirrors him like a shadow. Outside, a soft rain has begun to fall. The sound of droplets on the tiled roof above is a lullaby. A quiet, patient rhythm. You notice it through the open window. The scent of wet stone, the trickle down the gutter, the way the water makes the herbs in the window box glisten as if newly alive. The apothecary hands you a small sachet, tied with twine. Inside are dried petals, shavings of bark, and a single clove. Hang this by your bed, he says. Let it rest near your breath. You thank him, and he simply nods, already turning back to his table. He has more work to do. Tinctures to stir. Roots to slice. Not to cure the plague, he knows no such miracle exists, but to ease the body, to calm the mind. You step back into the rain. It falls gently, pattering on your cloak and boots. The street is darker now, but softer too. A few people pass, their heads bowed, their hands clutching little bags like yours. Perhaps they too were at the apothecary's door. You take your time walking back to your lodging. A baker, braving the rain, sets out a tray of flatbread beside a small lantern. He doesn't speak, just gestures. You leave a coin and take one. The bread is still warm. It smells of fennel and rosemary. By the time you reach your room, the sky has turned to slate. You hang your cloak by the hearth, remove your boots, and sink into the chair by the fire. The sachet from the apothecary rests on your lap. You lift it to your nose and inhale. The scent is unfamiliar and comforting all at once. Like childhood memories you didn't know you had. You lie down. Beneath the wool blanket, your body feels heavier. Grounded. The warmth of the herbs lingers on your skin. The fire crackles, slow and steady. Your eyes close. You hear the rain, soft and even. You feel the room, still and warm. You drift. And elsewhere in the kingdom, the story, soft as smoke, goes quietly on. The fog in London rolls in thick and slow, like smoke from 1,000 unseen chimneys. It coils between the rooftops and seeps under doorways. It softens the edges of the city until everything, houses, horses, people, appears to float in a world of mist. You blink, standing on a narrow cobbled street in Southwark, where even your breath seems muffled. You hear only the faint clip of hooves, the faraway bark of a dog, and the steady dripping of moisture from an eaves spout overhead. The scent of soot and wet wool lingers in the air. A candle flickers in a high window. It is one of many now lit during the day, not for light, but for hope. Candles placed on ledges, in doorways, near bedsides. Some are said to ward off plague, others to protect the soul if death should come in sleep. Most are simply comforting, a little warmth in a gray world. You tug your cloak tighter, the damp pressing into your bones. Your boots splash gently through puddles as you walk past a baker's shop, its windows shuttered. The painted sign above the door swings on rusty hinges. A blackbird perches there, its feathers wet, its head tilted toward you. No bread today. You pass a churchyard, where low mounds of earth rise in neat rows. A young priest stands near the iron gate, holding a small book close to his chest. His eyes are closed. His breath forms clouds in the air. A single flower rests on a stone, pale and perfect. The fog muffles everything. London, always so alive, so boisterous, has grown still. The Thames flows quietly now, its surface slick and unreadable. Boats drift past with no sound but the lap of water against wood. Their sails hang limp, and their passengers keep their heads down. In the heart of the city, wooden signs are painted with red crosses. Lord have mercy, the words read. No other warning is needed. Entire households marked by silence. You stop before a tavern once known for music and laughter. A place where firelight danced in tankards and songs spilled out into the night. Now its doors are bolted. A withered wreath hangs on the latch. Someone has drawn a small chalk heart beside it. You remember the scent of roasted meat, the clang of a lute, the way a stranger once offered you mulled wine and said, "May it warm your dreams." That feels like another lifetime now. In another window, more candles burn. This time, 5 of them in a row. One for each child, you think. Or perhaps one for each day since the illness came. Farther down the lane, you come upon a woman sweeping the stoop of a bookshop. Her broom scratches lightly over the stone. She wears gloves, and a linen cloth covers her face. When she sees you, she nods once. The motion is gentle, respectful. You return it. She doesn't speak. No one does, not anymore, not unless it's necessary. At the edge of the lane, you turn into a quieter alley and pause at a small door tucked between 2 stone buildings. This is the home of a physician, a real one, not the wandering peddlers selling rose water and blessed salt. You knock softly. Inside, a fire crackles. The door opens a crack, and a boy looks out, perhaps 10 years old, with bright eyes and a steady gaze. You explain your purpose in a whisper, and he nods, leading you inside. The physician's home smells of vinegar and thyme. Dried herbs hang from wooden beams. Books are stacked on every surface, their pages marked with notes in a curling, hurried hand. A cat sleeps on a cushion by the fire. The physician, an older woman with iron-gray hair, sits beside a table of glass bottles and copper pans. She listens as you speak, but her hands keep working, mixing a thick, dark paste into a ceramic bowl. She tells you what little she knows. The sickness moves like a shadow. It comes with heat and swelling. Some survive. Most do not. The rats may be the cause. Or the air. Or God. She doesn't know. What she knows is how to ease fever, how to cleanse wounds, how to keep breath in the body for one more day. She shows you a remedy made from boiled fennel and cloves. Not a cure, she says, but it helps the dreams stay soft. You thank her. She wraps the mixture in waxed cloth and gives you a small linen sachet of lavender to sleep with. Breathe it, she says, when the night is heavy. As you leave, the boy closes the door slowly behind you. Outside, the fog is thicker. A man passes with a cart, covered in canvas. The wheels creak. He says nothing. You step aside as he passes, and he nods, his face hidden beneath a hood. You walk toward the river now, drawn by the rhythm of the water. By London Bridge, a few people linger, each one standing apart. A mother with a child. An old sailor staring at the water. A monk, arms folded beneath his robe. None of them speak, but they all seem to be listening. To what, you're not sure. The tide is low. Bits of driftwood and torn cloth cling to the muddy banks. A few gulls cry faintly overhead, their wings heavy with fog. You follow the path along the river's edge. The stones are slick beneath your boots. Lanterns hang from hooks, their flames dim but steady. You find one unlit and pause. Inside your satchel is a stub of a candle. You place it inside and light it. It flares weakly, then steadies. One more light against the gray. You find a bench and sit. The fog curls around you, soft as wool. You listen, to the water, to the wind, to the faint whisper of your own breath. You remember a market from years ago, full of figs and wine and spiced nuts. A woman with laughing eyes who sold you a scarf the color of fire. You still have it, tucked into your cloak. You wrap it tighter now, grateful for its warmth. Time passes gently. Eventually, you stand and begin the slow walk back. You pass the church again. The priest is gone now, but the flower remains. The bookshop is shuttered. The tavern still silent. You return to your lodging, a small room above a weaver's shop. Inside, the hearth has been kindled. A thin broth waits in a bowl on the table. You sit and eat slowly, the warmth spreading from your throat to your hands. You place the lavender sachet beneath your pillow. As the fire dims, shadows dance across the walls. The candle by your bed flickers. Outside, the fog presses against the window pane, thick and silent. You lie down and pull the blanket to your chin. The sickness may still roam the streets. The fear may still linger. But here, in this moment, there is warmth. There is breath. There is light. Your eyes grow heavy. Your thoughts begin to drift. The candle burns lower. And somewhere in the world, in a quiet field or beneath a starlit sky, the story softly goes on. The village of Eam lies tucked among the green, folded hills of Derbyshire, quiet and still as breath held in prayer. The stone cottages nestle together beneath soft skies, and the air tastes of heather and wood smoke. From a distance, it looks untouched, serene. But within its quiet lanes, a story of sacrifice hums beneath the surface, gentle, unshakable, and slow. You wake in the upper loft of a weaver's cottage. The bed is rough but warm, layered with wool blankets, their edges fraying gently with age. The scent of thyme and soot lingers faintly in the air. Morning mist presses against the small window, blurring the view of the garden beyond. Below, you hear Margaret moving softly, her steps careful not to disturb the silence. She is already at her work table, setting out the day's threads. The loom creaks with familiarity. Its wooden frame groans softly as she begins to weave, each motion slow and methodical, a quiet act of endurance. You rise and dress without hurry. The world outside no longer rushes. The sickness came months ago, brought in a parcel of cloth from London, dark, elegant wool, speckled with something too small to see. The tailor who opened it never saw another sunrise. Nor did his apprentice. Nor within weeks did the schoolteacher who lived across the lane. And then the village made its choice. They would not flee. They would not risk spreading the shadow beyond their hills. They would remain, together apart, until the danger passed or death took them. No one had done this before. No one had asked them to. But in quiet meetings beneath the church bell tower, it was agreed. You step outside into the fog. The lane is lined with cottages built of gray stone, their walls softened by ivy and age. Wooden shutters remain closed. Chimneys breathe out thin wisps of smoke. The earth beneath your boots is damp, and the world smells of moss and dew. A man passes with a small lantern swinging from a stick. His steps are slow. He walks to the edge of the village and places the lantern beside the boundary stone, then turns and leaves without a word. This is how messages are sent now. The lantern is a sign. Someone inside the village needs supplies. If outsiders leave them nearby, they'll take the lantern in thanks. No contact. No words. Just small gestures lit by flame. You walk to the churchyard. Margaret is there, kneeling beside 3 fresh graves. She places a handful of dried lavender and a white stone on each one. Her lips move in prayer, but no sound reaches your ears. She stands, touches the rough cross beside the last grave, and then walks away. The air is still. You continue to the center of the village. The well is quiet. A small table beside it holds bowls of porridge and bread, wrapped in cloth. Those who need them will come later, one by one, and take only what they need. No one touches more than they must. Children leave painted stones on windowsills, small messages of hope. Stars, suns, smiling faces. A child waves to you from behind a curtain. You wave back. You sit by the stream for a time. The water runs over smooth stones, carrying leaves and light. A heron waits patiently in the shallows, its eyes fixed on the surface. You breathe in the cold air and let your thoughts drift. There are no carriages, no carts, no cries of market vendors. And yet life continues. An old man chops firewood in the distance, stacking it with precise care. A girl reads beneath a tree, her fingers curled around the edges of the page. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then goes quiet again. Margaret returns at midday with a basket of dried herbs and root vegetables. You help her prepare broth. She slices turnip. You stir the pot. The air inside her cottage grows fragrant and warm. She hums an old song beneath her breath, something soft and low and without words. As the sun begins to set, the villagers gather. Not close, never close, but at a distance around the old stone cross. The vicar, masked and robed, stands in the center. He reads from a worn book, his voice carrying through the still evening air like the toll of a bell. The people listen. Some kneel. Some bow their heads. A few weep silently, The ceremony is short. They do not sing, for song feels too bold now. But they each carry a small candle. And when the vicar finishes, they light them. One by one. A flame passed gently from wick to wick. You stand among them, your candle catching fire from Margaret's. The heat is slight. The glow is golden. The village, for a moment, becomes a constellation. Stars made of wax and willpower. Candles in the fog. Each light marks a promise, not of safety, but of presence. Of love that holds its shape, even in sorrow. The villagers drift away slowly, their candles lighting their way home. Some place them in windows. Others keep them close. You watch the flames move through the mist like lanterns on a dark sea. That night, you lie awake in the loft, watching the candle you placed on the sill. Its light flickers across the wooden beams above you. Outside, the wind sighs softly through the trees. Somewhere an owl calls. Margaret's loom has gone quiet. The village sleeps. And you, wrapped in wool and silence, finally feel your eyelids grow heavy. Your breath slows. And somewhere, in another quiet valley, another story softly stirs. You find yourself walking slowly, through the corridors of a great castle. The stone walls rise high above you, cold and gray in the dim light of flickering torches. Your footsteps echo softly, each sound swallowed by the vastness of these ancient halls. This is the royal palace, somewhere in England, or perhaps France. It doesn't matter which kingdom, really, because the story is the same everywhere. The year is 1349, and something invisible has changed everything. The king sits alone in his great hall. The massive oak table that once groaned under the weight of feast platters now stretches empty before him. Dust motes dance lazily in the pale light streaming through tall windows. Once, this room buzzed with the voices of advisors, nobles, servants hurrying back and forth with their important business. Now there is only silence. You settle into a chair. Perhaps you are a scribe, or maybe a trusted advisor who has somehow survived. You watch the king's shoulders, how they seem to carry an invisible weight. His crown sits heavy on his brow. But what good is a crown, when there are so few left to rule? The plague has done something remarkable, something that no army could accomplish. It has quietly, methodically, dissolved the very foundations of power, not through rebellion or war, but through simple absence. Let your mind drift now. Imagine the kingdom as it was. Peasants working the fields under the watchful eye of lords. Merchants paying their taxes, collecting in marketplaces. Soldiers drilling in courtyards. A great web of obligation and duty. Everyone in their place. Everyone knowing their role. But now the fields lie still. The merchants' stalls stand empty. The soldiers' barracks echo with emptiness. The king looks out his window, and where once he saw smoke rising from 100 cottage chimneys, now he sees only scattered wisps. Where once the roads bustled with travelers, now grass grows between the stones. Where once church bells rang out across villages full of life, now the silence stretches on, and on. You can feel it, this strange new world taking shape. Power itself is shifting, like sand running through an hourglass. The old ways, the careful hierarchies that took centuries to build, are quietly crumbling away. A messenger arrives, his horse's hooves clip-clopping slowly across the empty courtyard. He brings word from a distant province. Another village abandoned. Another lord's manor, standing silent. Another tax collector, who will never return. The king nods slowly. What else can he do? You cannot command subjects who are no longer there. You cannot collect taxes from empty houses. You cannot maintain order in lands where order itself has faded away like morning mist. But here's the strange thing, the beautiful thing in its way. As the old certainties dissolve, something new begins to take their place. The few peasants who remain, they begin to realize their own worth. When there are only 10 workers left where once there were 100, suddenly, those 10 have choices they never had before. They can demand higher wages. They can refuse unreasonable requests. They can even, imagine this, pack up their belongings and walk away, to find a lord who will treat them better. For the first time in generations, they have power. The king in his empty hall begins to understand that ruling is not about commanding, but about earning loyalty. Not about taking what you want, but about giving people reasons to stay. The plague has taught him, in its quiet way, that kingdoms are not made of castles and crowns, but of people, living, breathing people who choose, every day, whether to be part of something or to walk away. You watch as he stands slowly and walks to the window. The sun is setting, painting the empty landscape in soft golds and purples. Tomorrow, he will send out different messages. Not demands, but invitations. Not threats, but promises. Not orders from on high, but requests from one human being to another. The great halls of power, once so full of noise and ceremony, now hold only whispers. But in those whispers, in that newfound quiet, something gentler is being born. A different kind of kingdom, built not on fear, but on mutual need. Not on force, but on cooperation. And as you sit in that peaceful hall, listening to the soft sound of your own breathing, you can feel yourself becoming part of that quiet transformation, letting go of the old, harsh certainties, and floating gently into something softer, something kinder, something new. The king without subjects, learning to become, simply, a man among men. And you, drifting now on waves of history, into the gentle darkness of sleep. You find yourself, walking slowly, through the heavy wooden doors of a great cathedral. The air is cool against your skin, thick with the scent of old incense and melted candle wax. Your footsteps echo softly against the stone floor, each sound rising up, into the vast shadows above. This is a place that once rang with voices, hundreds of voices raised in prayer, in hymns that seemed to lift the very stones toward heaven. But now, in this year of 1349, the silence feels different, deeper, more questioning. You slide into a wooden pew, worn smooth by countless hands, countless bodies seeking comfort. The wood is cold at first, then slowly warms beneath you. Around you, scattered throughout this enormous space, sit perhaps a dozen souls. Where once every seat was filled, now vast empty spaces stretch between the faithful. Before you, candles flicker on the altar, their light dancing across painted saints on the walls. Saints with golden halos, saints who once seemed so certain, so protective. But now, their painted eyes seem to hold questions too. You close your eyes, and let yourself remember how it used to be, the priest's voice booming from the pulpit, promising that faith could move mountains, that prayer could heal the sick, that God watched over his faithful servants with loving care. The congregation would nod, would murmur amen, would drop their coins into the collection plate, trusting, believing, certain that their devotion would be rewarded, that goodness would be protected, that evil would be punished. But then the plague came, and it didn't choose, did it? It didn't spare the devout grandmother who never missed morning mass. It didn't protect the young priest who gave his last crust of bread to hungry children. It didn't avoid the monastery where monks spent their days copying holy scriptures by candlelight. The sickness came to all, to the faithful and the faithless alike, like rain falling on both the just and the unjust, like wind that blows where it will, without regard for human prayers or human goodness. You open your eyes and look around this quiet cathedral. In a pew across the aisle, an old woman kneels, her lips moving silently, but her prayers sound different now, less like requests, more like conversations, less like demands for protection, more like questions whispered into the darkness. Are you there? She seems to be asking. And if you are, what does this all mean? Near the front, a young man sits with his head in his hands. Perhaps he lost his wife, his children, his parents. Perhaps he prayed harder than anyone, fasted longer, gave more generously, and still the darkness came for those he loved. His faith hasn't disappeared, but it has changed shape, like iron heated in a forge, softened, then reformed into something different, something more complex, something that can hold both love and loss, both hope and uncertainty. The priest himself, when he appears to light the evening candles, moves more slowly than before. His gestures are gentler, his voice quieter. The grand pronouncements of absolute certainty have given way to softer words, words that acknowledge mystery, words that admit, I don't know. And somehow, this honesty, this admission of human limitations, makes his words more comforting than all the old certainties ever were. You watch the candlelight flicker, and realize that faith itself is like a candle flame. It doesn't burn with the same steady brightness all the time. Sometimes it flickers, sometimes it dims, sometimes it seems about to go out entirely. But a flame that has weathered wind is somehow stronger than one that has never been tested, more resilient, more real, more capable of providing warmth when it's truly needed. Around you, in this quiet cathedral, a new kind of faith is being born. Not the faith that promises easy answers, but the faith that can hold difficult questions. Not the faith that guarantees protection from suffering, but the faith that offers companionship within suffering. Not the faith that explains why bad things happen to good people, but the faith that says, "You are not alone in your confusion. You are not alone in your pain. You are not alone in your seeking." The old woman across the aisle finishes her silent conversation with the divine and looks up. Her eyes meet yours. And in that moment, you both understand that faith has not been destroyed by this plague, but transformed. Like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. It looks nothing like what it was before. But it can fly now, in ways it never could when it was bound by its old certainties. The evening bells begin to ring, softly, calling not with commands, but with invitations. Come if you need to. Stay away if you must. The divine, whatever it is, wherever it dwells, will be here. In the questions as much as in the answers. In the doubt as much as in the certainty. You rise slowly from your pew and make your way toward the doors. The stone floor feels warm now beneath your feet. The shadows seem less dark, more like gentle embrace. Outside, the stars are beginning to appear, scattered across the darkening sky like tiny candles, each one burning alone, yet somehow part of a vast constellation of light. And you, walking slowly home, carrying this new understanding, this faith that can bend without breaking, this trust that doesn't require all the answers, only the willingness to keep walking, to keep seeking, to keep loving, even in the midst of mystery. The cathedral grows quiet behind you, but the peace, the gentle peace of questions held with love, walks with you, settles around you, like a blessing that asks for nothing, and gives everything. And in that peace, you drift soft as prayer, deep as faith, into the gentle darkness of sleep. In the aftermath of such profound silence, something unexpected began to stir. Not the clatter of revolt or the thunder of rebellion, but something quieter, more profound. The very foundations of society were shifting like sand beneath a gentle tide. Picture yourself walking through the countryside now, perhaps a year or two after the worst has passed. The morning mist clings to the valleys, and you notice something different in the air. There's a subtle confidence in the way a farmer straightens his back as he tends his smaller plot of land. A quiet dignity in how a miller's daughter holds her head as she walks to market. The great manors still stand on their hills, their stone walls catching the early light. But something has changed in the relationship between those grand halls and the humble cottages below. The invisible threads that once bound peasant to lord so tightly have loosened, stretched, and in many places, quietly snapped. You see, my friend, when so many had fallen silent, those who remained found themselves precious in ways they had never imagined. The lord who once commanded hundreds of workers now found himself with perhaps 30 or 40. The fields that once teemed with bent backs and calloused hands now lay waiting, patient and fertile, but with no one to tend them. And so, almost without anyone planning it, almost without anyone even noticing at first, the peasants began to rise. Not with pitchforks and torches, but with something far more powerful, their irreplaceable labor. Imagine young Willem, who once spent his days hunched over his master's wheat fields for a few copper coins and a meal of gruel. Now, as he walks between the great estates, he finds lords competing for his services. "Work my fields," one calls softly from his horse. "I'll pay you twice what Lord Edmund offers, and throw in a cottage of your own." Willem pauses, his rough hands resting on his wooden staff. For the first time in his life, he has choices. He can negotiate. He can say no. He can pack his few belongings and walk to the next village, where perhaps an even better offer awaits. The transformation happens quietly, like dawn breaking across a still lake. In villages across England, across France, across the Holy Roman Empire, peasants who once worked the same plot of land their grandfathers had worked, bound by invisible chains of tradition and law. These same peasants now find themselves free to wander, to choose, to demand fair wages for their labor. Some lords, the wiser ones, adapt quickly. They smile through gritted teeth as they offer better terms, warmer cottages, more food, actual silver coins instead of mere promises. They know that without workers, their vast estates are nothing more than empty stage sets, beautiful but useless. Other lords resist, clinging to the old ways like shipwrecked sailors clinging to driftwood. They demand that peasants work for the same pittance as before, insist that the old bonds still hold. But their fields grow wild with weeds, their barns stand empty, their wealth slowly trickles away like water through cupped hands. In the towns, the transformation is even more remarkable. Master craftsmen who once had their pick of eager apprentices now find themselves begging young men to learn their trades. Bakers, blacksmiths, weavers. All discover that their skills are suddenly precious, their labor worth more than ever before. Margaret, the weaver's daughter, once spent 14 hours a day at her loom for barely enough to keep her family fed. Now she finds herself courted by 3 different cloth merchants, each offering better terms than the last. She can afford to rent a larger room, to buy meat for her children's dinner, to save a few coins for the future. The change ripples outward like stones dropped in a still pond. Villages that once sent their finest grain to distant lords now keep more for themselves. Markets that once felt the heavy hand of feudal taxation now negotiate fairer terms. Roads that once carried endless streams of tribute to castle walls now see more balanced trade flowing in both directions. It's not a revolution in the way we might imagine. No dramatic speeches or storming of castles. Instead, it's a quiet revolution of daily choices, of small acts of dignity, of ordinary people discovering their own worth. A servant who asks for Sunday afternoons off. A farmer who insists on being paid in silver rather than promises. A miller who charges fair prices and refuses to be cheated. The nobility, those who survive and adapt, find themselves learning new skills. Negotiation replaces command. Respect replaces fear. Some even discover that treating their workers as human beings rather than tools makes for a more prosperous estate, a more stable realm. But perhaps the most profound change is in the minds of the peasants themselves. Children who once learned to bow their heads and accept their lot now grow up seeing their parents negotiate, seeing their families prosper, seeing that the world can change. They carry themselves differently, speak with more assurance, dream dreams their grandparents could never have imagined. And so, in the gentle aftermath of such profound loss, something beautiful emerges. Not the violent upheaval that some might expect, but a quiet flowering of human dignity. A recognition that every person's labor has value, that every life has worth, that the bonds between people work best when they're chosen freely rather than imposed by force. The Black Death, in its terrible passage, had inadvertently broken the invisible chains that bound peasant to lord. And in breaking those chains, it had set free not just bodies, but souls. Not just labor, but hope. Not just individuals, but the very idea that ordinary people could shape their own destiny. As you drift now towards sleep, let this gentle truth settle over you like a warm blanket. That even in the darkest times, even when the world seems to be ending, sometimes the seeds of a better future are quietly taking root. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a beginning in disguise. The peasant's quiet rise, born not of anger, but of necessity, not of revolution, but of simple human dignity, continues to whisper across the centuries, reminding us that real change often comes, not with thunder, but with the gentle persistence of morning light slowly, surely transforming the world. In the quiet years that followed, when the world had grown still and then slowly begun to breathe again, something remarkable began to emerge from the silence. Not the sound of hammers rebuilding walls or the chatter of returning markets, but something softer, more profound. The human soul, having stared into such darkness, began to create beauty with a tenderness it had never known before. Picture yourself wandering through a monastery scriptorium now, perhaps 3 or 4 years after the worst has passed. The morning light filters through tall, narrow windows, casting gentle rectangles of gold across worn wooden tables. A lone monk sits hunched over parchment, his quill moving with deliberate, loving strokes. But something is different about his work, something that speaks of loss transformed into something luminous. Brother Francis dips his brush into a small pot of ultramarine blue, a color so precious it costs more than gold. Before the Great Dying, such extravagance would have been reserved for the robes of the Virgin Mary, the crowns of kings depicted in holy manuscripts. But now he paints the simple robe of a plague victim ascending to heaven, surrounded by angels whose faces hold both sorrow and infinite compassion. You lean closer, careful not to disturb his concentration, and notice the delicate details emerging under his patient hand. The manuscript he illuminates tells not of distant saints or ancient miracles, but of recent memory, of neighbors who perished, of communities that endured, of the strange beauty found in caring for the dying. His art has become a prayer written in pigment and gold leaf. In the cities that survived, in the workshops where craftsmen once again gather around their tools, a new sensibility emerges like spring flowers pushing through winter earth. The painters who once focused solely on grand religious scenes now find themselves drawn to quieter subjects. A mother holding her surviving child, an old man sharing bread with a stranger, hands folded in gratitude for another sunrise. Imagine walking through Florence now, where the great artist workshops are slowly coming back to life. Master Giovanni stands before his easel, mixing colors with the same careful attention his father once gave to the perfect red for a cardinal's robes. But the painting taking shape under his brush tells a different story than those painted before the Great Silence. It shows a group of ordinary people, a baker, a cloth merchant, a young mother, gathered around a simple wooden table. Their faces, illuminated by candlelight, speak of something the old paintings rarely captured: the profound preciousness of simply being alive, together, sharing another day. There's a tenderness in how he paints their weathered hands, their lined faces, their eyes that have seen too much loss to take anything for granted ever again. The change isn't only in what artists choose to paint, but in how they paint it. Colors seem somehow more vibrant, yet more gentle. Lines flow with a kind of gratitude, as if the very act of creating beauty has become a form of prayer, a way of saying thank you to whatever force allowed them to survive, to continue, to transform pain into something that might comfort others. In the scriptoriums and workshops, new stories begin to emerge in verse and prose. Not epic tales of heroes conquering dragons, but quieter narratives that speak to the soul. Poems about the last conversation with a friend, stories of communities that learn to care for strangers as family, verses that find the sacred in the simple act of tending the sick. Brother Thomas, copying manuscripts in a monastery near Canterbury, finds himself adding small marginalia that weren't in the original text. Tiny illustrations of everyday kindness he witnessed during the darkest months. A woman sharing her last loaf of bread. Children playing in a cemetery, their laughter somehow making the place less frightening. Two survivors embracing in recognition of their shared endurance. These small additions, painted in colors mixed with his own tears and hope, transform ancient texts into something alive, something that speaks directly to anyone who has known loss and found their way back to light. The wealthy patrons who commission new works find their tastes changed as well. Duke Alessandro, who once demanded paintings of his military victories and vast estates, now asks for something different. A quiet scene of his family gathered around their hearth, perhaps, or a portrait that captures not his power, but his gratitude for surviving another winter with his loved ones intact. Lady Catherine, commissioning a new chapel fresco, chooses not scenes of judgment and divine wrath, but images of mercy, of saints tending the sick, of angels comforting the grieving, of paradise depicted not as a distant golden city, but as a place where separated loved ones are gently reunited. Even the troubadours and traveling musicians find their songs changing. The old ballads of courtly love and heroic deeds now share space with gentler melodies. Lullabies that comfort those who wake from nightmares, songs that celebrate the simple miracle of harvest time. Ballads that honor not kings and knights, but the healers and caretakers who held communities together when everything else fell apart. In the workshops where stained glass windows are slowly being repaired and replaced, craftsmen find themselves choosing different stories to tell in colored light. Where once they might have depicted the dramatic moments of biblical history, the parting of seas, the toppling of towers, now they're drawn to quieter scenes. Jesus healing the sick, Mary comforting the grieving. Saints known not for their dramatic martyrdom, but for their gentle service to ordinary people. Master William, cutting pieces of ruby glass for a new church window, pauses in his work to hold a fragment up to the afternoon light. The way the red glass transforms the harsh sunlight into something warm and gentle reminds him of something he learned during the plague years. That even the most difficult experiences could be transformed into something beautiful, something that might offer comfort to others walking through their own darkness. The art emerging from this time of great silence carries within it a quality that previous generations rarely achieved. A profound intimacy with both loss and hope, a tenderness born of having stood at the edge of ending and chosen to continue creating anyway. It speaks not to the mind alone, but directly to the heart of anyone who has ever grieved, ever feared, ever found unexpected strength in the midst of overwhelming darkness. And perhaps this is what makes the art of this era so enduringly beautiful. It was created not to impress or overwhelm, but to heal. Not to demonstrate power or wealth, but to remind viewers of their own capacity for endurance, for love, for finding meaning in the midst of suffering. As candlelight flickers in the workshops where these gentle masterpieces slowly take shape, The artists work with a kind of reverent attention they might never have known without first walking through such profound darkness. Their brushes move like prayers. Their colors bloom like flowers in a garden tended by someone who has learned never to take beauty for granted. And so from the great silence, from the emptied halls and quieted voices, emerges something that might never have existed otherwise. Art that knows the weight of loss, but chooses beauty anyway. Creativity that has looked into darkness, but turns toward light. Human hands that have touched sorrow, now creating comfort for others who walk the same difficult path. The brushstrokes dry slowly in the candlelight, the illuminated letters gleam with gold and devotion. The carved figures seem to breathe with understanding. All of it born from silence, transformed into song, whispering across the centuries, that even after the deepest loss, beauty can still, quietly, bloom. In the soft light of early morning, perhaps 5 years after the great silence had settled and then slowly lifted, let us visit a small village nestled in a valley where wildflowers now grow where houses once stood. The village of Little Wickham, like thousands of others across the land, tells a story not of dramatic resurrection, but of quiet, persistent renewal. You walk down what was once the main street, your footsteps soft on earth that has reclaimed much of the old cobblestone. But listen carefully. Can you hear it? The gentle sound of rebuilding. Not the frantic hammering of urgent reconstruction, but the steady, patient rhythm of people who have learned to value each day's small progress. Thomas the carpenter works alone now where once his workshop bustled with 3 apprentices and his 2 sons. The plague took them all, leaving him with hands that remember their skills, but a heart that had to learn to find purpose in solitude. His plane moves across a piece of oak with practiced ease, shaping what will become the doorframe for the miller's new cottage. The wood shavings curl and fall like golden snow, and there's something almost meditative in the way he works, as if each careful stroke is both craft and prayer. The new houses rising in Little Wickham are different from those that came before. Smaller, perhaps, built by survivors who learned that a warm hearth shared with a few beloved souls matters more than grand halls echoing with emptiness. Margaret, the baker's widow, builds her new cottage with just 2 rooms instead of the sprawling structure that once housed her family of 8. But notice how lovingly she tends the herb garden outside her door, how carefully she places each stone in her new wall. The village square, once crowded with market stalls and bustling with dozens of vendors, now hosts a more intimate gathering. On market days, perhaps 6 or 7 traders spread their wares on wooden tables under the old oak tree that somehow survived everything. But there's a warmth in their exchanges that speaks of relationships deepened by shared survival. Old Henrik, selling his pottery, knows each customer by name, asks about their children, remembers their preferences from seasons past. Young Anna, barely 16 but already skilled in the healing arts taught to her by her grandmother before the old woman passed, tends a shop that serves 3 villages now instead of 1. People walk many miles to seek her tinctures and tisanes, not just because healers are scarce, but because she learned her craft during the darkest times. Her gentle hands know suffering, and her remedies carry not just the power of herbs, but the comfort of understanding. The rhythms of daily life in Little Wickham flow differently now. The church bell, once rung by Father Benedict who trained 3 altar boys, is now tended by Sarah the weaver, who learned the sacred schedule because someone had to keep time for the community. She rings it with the same reverence the old priest once showed, and somehow the sound seems to carry further across the valley, calling fewer people but gathering them with deeper purpose. In the fields surrounding the village, a new kind of agriculture emerges. With fewer hands to work the land, the survivors have become more thoughtful about what they plant and how they tend it. Robert, who inherited his father's farm and his brothers and his uncles after the plague, cannot possibly work all the land alone. So he chooses the most fertile plots, tends them with extraordinary care, and lets the rest return to wildflower meadows that feed the bees and rest the soil. His harvest is smaller than the combined yield of 3 farms once was, but it's enough to feed his family and provide surplus for trade. And there's something to be said for the way he knows every plant in his smaller fields, can tell you the story of each apple tree in his orchard, can predict the weather by watching how his chickens behave in the morning. The village inn, rebuilt by Samuel the innkeeper with help from his new wife Emma, opens its doors to a different kind of traveler now. Merchants still pass through, but so do pilgrims seeking healing, scholars collecting stories of survival, young people from other villages looking for communities to join. The inn's common room, lit by candles and warmed by a modest fire, becomes a place where tales are shared not just for entertainment, but for the deep comfort of knowing that others have walked through darkness and emerged into light. Emma serves stew from a pot that never quite empties, adding vegetables from their garden and herbs from Anna's shop, stretching each meal to welcome whoever might need warmth and nourishment. The portions are smaller than in the old days of abundance, but somehow the food tastes richer, seasoned as it is with gratitude and genuine care for each person who sits at their rough wooden tables. Children play in Little Wickham now, though fewer than before. But watch how the adults interact with them. There's a tenderness, a protective attention that speaks of having learned how precious young life truly is. Little Mary, the blacksmith's daughter, is treasured not just by her father, but by the entire village. When she laughs while chasing butterflies in the meadow, you can see smiles spread across the faces of everyone within earshot, as if her joy reminds them all of what they've managed to preserve. The village's new traditions reflect its transformed understanding of what matters. Instead of elaborate harvest festivals, they hold simple gratitude gatherings where each family brings one dish to share and tells one story of something beautiful that happened that year. Instead of competitive sports and contests, they organize gentle celebrations, communal gardening days, shared storytelling evenings, quiet ceremonies to remember those who are no longer with them. Father Michael, the young priest who finally arrived to serve the parish after years of vacancy, finds himself ministering to a congregation that has already learned many of the deepest lessons he hoped to teach. They know the fragility of life, the importance of forgiveness, the value of serving others in small, daily ways. His sermons become more like conversations, his church more like a gathering of friends who help each other remember that despite everything they've lost, they still have reasons to hope. The seasonal rhythms feel more significant now. Spring brings not just relief from winter's cold, but a kind of resurrection that everyone understands viscerally. Summer's warmth is appreciated by people who remember too many funeral pyres, too many empty beds during fever-filled nights. Autumn's harvest is celebrated by those who truly understand the miracle of abundance. Winter's quiet is welcomed by souls who have learned to find peace in stillness. And perhaps most remarkably, Little Wickham has become a place that others seek out, not for its wealth or grand buildings, but for something harder to define. Travelers speak of the quality of attention they receive there, the way conversations flow with unusual depth, the sense that the community has discovered something valuable in the ashes of its losses. The village is smaller now, quieter, less prosperous in the old sense of that word. But it pulses with a different kind of richness. The wealth of people who have learned to treasure each other, who understand that community is not a convenience but a sacred trust, who have discovered that rebuilding isn't just about raising new walls, but about nurturing new ways of being together. Voice growing gentler, more reflective. As evening settles over Little Wickham, candles flicker in windows where families gather for simple meals and quiet conversations. The sounds are softer now, children's prayers, the gentle murmur of adults sharing their days, the distant lowing of cattle being led to their evening pasture. It's not the same village that stood here before the Great Silence. It's something both smaller and somehow larger. Smaller in numbers, in buildings, in the old measures of success. But larger in heart, in understanding, in the quiet wisdom that comes from having learned what truly matters when everything else falls away. And in this gentle rebuilding, in this patient renewal, in this transformation of loss into a different kind of abundance, Little Wickham whispers a truth that echoes across the centuries, that sometimes the most beautiful communities are born not from prosperity, but from the shared courage to begin again, together, with love. You find yourself walking slowly down a narrow cobblestone street. The morning mist clings to the walls of half-timbered houses, and from somewhere nearby comes the gentle sound of pestle grinding against mortar. Steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. You follow the sound until you reach a small wooden door, painted green with age. Above it hangs a simple sign, carved with herbs and symbols you don't quite recognize. This is the shop of Master Aldrich, the village healer, and today, in this year of 1350, his work has become more important than ever before. The door opens with a soft creak, and you step inside. The air is thick with the scent of dried lavender, crushed rosemary, and something else, something earthier, more mysterious. Bundles of herbs hang from every rafter, casting intricate shadows in the dim light filtering through small windows. Behind a worn wooden counter, Master Aldrich works quietly, his gray beard moving slightly as he concentrates. In his hands, a small bronze scale, weighing pinches of this, measures of that. His movements are careful, deliberate, almost ceremonial. You settle onto a three-legged stool and watch him work. This is a man who has seen the plague come and go, who has tried everything. Every remedy passed down from his grandfather, every new idea whispered by desperate families, every prayer and potion and strange ritual. Some worked, most didn't. But something extraordinary happened in the trying. On the shelves around you, glass bottles catch the light, filled with tinctures of willow bark for pain, elderberry syrup for fever, chamomile flowers dried and ready for calming teas. These remedies are old, older than memory, passed down through generations of healers who learned by watching, by trying, by caring for their neighbors. But next to these familiar bottles, you notice something new. A leather-bound journal, its pages covered with careful notes, drawings of plants, records of which treatments seemed to help, which ones made no difference, which ones might have caused harm. Master Aldrich catches you looking, and smiles. "The plague taught us something," he says softly, his voice like old wool. "It taught us to write things down, to compare, to question." He opens the journal, and shows you pages filled with observations. Old Henrik's cough, improved after 3 days with honey and thyme. Young Mary's fever, broke after willow bark tea. But not until the 4th day. Simple words, but revolutionary ones. The beginning of something we might recognize. The slow, patient work of understanding, of testing, of learning from both success and failure. Through the small window, you can see the village square, where just a year ago, stranger remedies were tried. You remember, if you let your mind drift back, the processions of flagellants, whipping themselves bloody, believing that pain could drive away sickness. You remember the traveling merchants, selling amulets blessed by distant saints, promising protection for a few silver coins, and the astrologers, studying star charts by candlelight, convinced that the alignment of planets had caused this great dying. None of it was wrong, not really. When people are afraid, when children are dying, when nothing makes sense anymore, the human heart reaches for anything. Anything at all that might help, that might bring some measure of control to the uncontrollable. The mother who hung garlic around her baby's neck, the father who burned costly incense every morning, the grandmother who recited the same prayer 100 times a day. They were all doing what humans have always done, what we still do, fighting darkness with whatever light they could find. But here, in this quiet shop, something different was growing. Master Aldrich would try the garlic, the incense, the prayers, but then he would watch and write and remember. And slowly, very slowly, patterns began to emerge. The sickness spreads faster in crowded places, he writes. People who live near the docks fall ill first. Those who wash their hands with soap seem to stay healthier longer. Small observations, made without understanding the invisible world of germs and contagion, but somehow pointing toward truth. You watch him prepare a remedy for someone's grandmother. Willow bark for her aching joints, honey to soothe it down, chamomile to help her sleep. His hands move with practiced gentleness, and you realize this is medicine too. This caring attention, this willingness to try, to comfort, to stay present with suffering. The plague had no cure. Not then, perhaps not even now. But in the face of that helplessness, something beautiful emerged. The recognition that healing is not always about curing. Sometimes it's about sitting with someone in their pain, about offering what comfort you can, about refusing to turn away. On another shelf, you notice masks. Strange leather masks with long, beak-like noses, stuffed with aromatic herbs. The plague doctors wore these, thinking that bad air, miasma, carried the sickness. They were wrong about the cause, but somehow right about protection. The herbs did nothing, but the leather kept droplets at bay. The wrong reason, but accidentally. The right result, truth finding its way, even through misunderstanding. Master Aldrich closes his journal and looks out the window. Every day, I learn something, he says quietly. Every person I try to help teaches me something new. We don't have all the answers, may never have them, but we have today. And today, we can be a little bit wiser than yesterday. He reaches for a small pot of salve, made from comfrey and calendula, for healing cuts and bruises. Simple, gentle, effective. My grandmother used this, he says, and her grandmother before her. Some knowledge is old, and still true. You rise from your stool, and make your way back to the door. The The pestle and mortar have started their rhythm again, steady, comforting, like the sound of someone working, someone caring, someone refusing to give up. Outside, the mist is lifting, revealing a world where ancient wisdom and new understanding walk hand in hand, where superstition and science are not enemies, but fellow travelers on the long road toward healing, toward hope, toward the quiet miracle of someone, anyone, choosing to help. And you, walking slowly home, carrying the scent of herbs on your clothes, the sound of that gentle grinding in your ears, drift into sleep like sinking into a bed of lavender, surrounded by the knowledge that somewhere, someone is still working, still caring, still grinding hope into powder, mixing comfort into tea, writing tomorrow's wisdom in today's patient observations. The art of healing, older than castles, newer than morning, continuing, always continuing, in gentle hands and quiet hearts, and the endless human desire to make things just a little bit better. In the vast expanse of desert and mountain, where the ancient trade routes once pulsed like arteries carrying the lifeblood of civilizations, something profound has changed. The Great Silk Road, that legendary pathway that connected east and west for over 1,000 years, now lies quiet under stars that have watched empires rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the Gobi Desert as the sun sets behind distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The wind carries whispers of sand across empty caravanserai that once echoed with the voices of merchants from a dozen lands. Here, in this vast silence, lies one of history's most remarkable stories. How a plague that began in whispered rumors slowly brought the world's greatest trade network to its knees, and how, in that sleeping, it transformed the very nature of human connection across continents. The Great Road was never really a single road, of course. It was a network of pathways stretching like a web across Asia, connecting the silk workshops of China to the spice markets of India, the precious metal mines of Central Asia to the hungry markets of Europe. For centuries, this network had carried more than goods. It carried ideas, religions, languages, and yes, diseases across distances that took years to traverse on foot or horseback. In the trading post of Samarkand, once the jewel of the Silk Road, the morning light now falls on courtyards where only a few hardy souls still gather to trade. Ahmad the silk merchant sits in the shade of an ancient mulberry tree, his weathered hands sorting through bolts of fabric that seem almost too precious for the diminished world around him. He remembers when this courtyard buzzed with hundreds of traders, when the air was thick with dust kicked up by countless caravans, when languages from across the known world mingled in a constant symphony of commerce. Now, perhaps 24 merchants spread their wares where once there were hundreds. The plague that swept along these very trade routes, carried by the same caravans that brought silk and spices, has left the great road networks broken and afraid. Cities that once welcomed foreign traders now view them with suspicion. Kingdoms that once thrived on the taxes collected from passing caravans now struggle to understand how to survive without that steady stream of revenue. Ahmed's own story reflects the transformation of the entire network. His father and grandfather before him had been merchants, leading caravans of 50 camels loaded with silk, jade, and precious stones from the workshops of Cathay to the markets of Baghdad and beyond. But the Great Dying changed everything. The caravan routes that once moved with the regularity of rivers now flow only in fits and starts, when enough brave souls can be gathered, when the political situation is stable enough, when the fear of contagion has temporarily subsided. The caravanserai of Otrar, once a thriving way station where traders from China met merchants from Persia, now stands mostly empty. Its thick walls, built to protect against bandits and sandstorms, once enclosed courtyards that could shelter 300 camels and their handlers. Today, perhaps 20 animals rest in the shade of its arched galleries, their bells jingling softly in the desert breeze as they shift and settle for the night. Mahmud, the keeper of this ancient inn, moves through the near-empty courtyards like a guardian of memories. His father had told him stories of nights when every room was filled, when the air shimmered with cooking fires and the sound of a dozen languages being spoken simultaneously. When musicians from distant lands would play late into the night, when scholars and philosophers would debate under stars that seemed close enough to touch, when the courtyard fountains reflected the faces of people who had traveled impossible distances to be here. Now, Mahmud tends his fountains for the handful of traders who still pass this way. He maintains the guest rooms, keeps the wells clean, stocks his small store with the essentials that travelers need. But there are days, many days, when no one comes at all, and the vast caravanserai sleeps under the desert sun like a great ship becalmed on an ocean of sand. The routes through the Hindu Kush mountains, once filled with the tinkling of camel bells and the shouts of caravan leaders, now echo mostly with wind and the distant cries of eagles. Pass after pass, carved into the stone by centuries of use, sees only the occasional small group of traders, perhaps a dozen men with half a dozen pack animals, carrying goods that could once have filled a caravan of 100 beasts. Young Li Wei, a merchant from the city of Kashgar, makes this journey with his small band of companions, carrying precious jade and a few bolts of silk toward the markets of Samarkand. His grandfather had commanded caravans of legendary size, moving with the confidence of someone who knew that the roads were safe, that trading partners could be trusted, that the complex network of credit and relationships that made long-distance trade possible was as solid as the mountains themselves. But Li Wei travels differently. He moves quietly, often avoiding the main routes, staying in smaller settlements where he's less likely to encounter the suspicion that now greets foreign traders in many places. His goods are fewer but more carefully chosen, his destinations planned with the knowledge that a journey that once took 3 months might now take 6, not because the roads are longer, but because they are no longer reliable. The great trading cities of the Silk Road reflect this transformation in their very architecture. Bokhara, once called the Dome of Islam, for its magnificent buildings funded by trade wealth, still gleams in the desert sun, but with a quieter dignity. The bazaars that once overflowed with goods from across the known world now specialize in local products, serving regional needs rather than international desires. In the covered marketplace of Bokhara, beneath stone arches that have sheltered traders for centuries, old Hassan arranges his display of carpets with the patience of someone who has learned to wait. These carpets, woven by local artisans, tell stories in their patterns, stories of adaptation, of communities that once looked outward to the wide world, but now focus inward on their own survival and renewal. Hassan remembers when his shop was just one of dozens selling carpets, when customers came from as far away as Venice and Kiev to choose from thousands of rugs in every conceivable pattern and size. Now, his shop is one of only 3 in the entire bazaar, but the carpets he sells are perhaps more beautiful than ever, created by weavers who have time to perfect their craft, who work with the meditative patience of people who have learned that quality matters more than quantity. The transformation of the Silk Road affects not just merchants and traders, but entire civilizations that had grown dependent on its steady flow of goods and ideas. The Chinese workshops that once produced silk specifically for export to distant lands now focus on domestic markets. The master weavers of Hangzhou, whose ancestors had created silk so fine it seemed to capture moonlight itself, now work on smaller projects. Garments for local nobles, ceremonial robes for temple priests, burial shrouds of extraordinary beauty for those who can afford to be buried in silk. Master Chen sits at his loom in the early morning light, his fingers moving with the unconscious skill of 50 years' practice. The silk he weaves today will not journey to the markets of Baghdad or Constantinople. It will be sold in the local market, perhaps to a merchant's wife or a scholar's daughter. But there's something to be said for knowing where your work will end up, for creating beauty that will be appreciated by people you might actually meet, for being part of a community rather than serving distant, unknown customers. The spice trade, once the lifeblood of the Indian Ocean routes that connected to the overland Silk Road, has similarly contracted. In the markets of Kerala, where black pepper once piled high in warehouses waiting for the next caravan to carry it westward, the spice merchants now serve primarily local needs. The pepper is still harvested, still processed with the same care their ancestors showed, but it travels shorter distances to reach fewer customers. Radha, whose family has grown and traded spices for 20 generations, tends her smaller plots with the attention of someone who has learned to find abundance in moderation. The pepper vines climb their support poles with the same vigor they always have, but now she knows that each peppercorn she harvests will be valued more highly, treated with greater respect, used more carefully by customers who understand that such luxuries are no longer to be taken for granted. The great port of Hormuz, once the gateway between the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, where goods from China met goods from Africa in markets that never seemed to sleep, now operates on a reduced scale. The dhows that once crowded its harbor by the hundreds now number in the dozens. But those that remain are often more beautifully crafted, sailed by crews who take pride in their seamanship, carrying goods that represent the best of what their regions can produce. Captain Yusuf, whose family has sailed these waters for generations, now makes his living with a single ship instead of the small fleet his father once commanded. But he knows every current, every wind pattern, every safe harbor between Hormuz and Calicut. His ship carries fewer goods but often more precious ones. Rare pearls from the diving beds of Bahrain, incense of exceptional quality from the mountains of Oman, dates so perfect they seem like jewels. The transformation of the Silk Road creates ripple effects that reach far beyond trade. The great libraries of Samarkand and Bokhara, once fed by a constant stream of scholars and manuscripts from across the known world, now focus on preserving and studying their existing collections. But this inward focus has its own rewards. Manuscripts that were once merely stored are now studied intensively, translated, copied, and preserved with extraordinary care. Brother Anselm, the keeper of manuscripts in the library of Samarkand, spends his days with texts that represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Greek philosophical treatises translated into Arabic, Chinese medical texts rendered into Persian, Indian mathematical works preserved in Sanskrit. All of these sleep in his careful custody like seeds waiting for the right season to sprout again. In the scriptoriums attached to these libraries, scribes work with a kind of devotion that comes from knowing that their work matters more than ever. When books can no longer be easily replaced, when the network of scholars that once spanned continents has been reduced to local communities, every manuscript becomes precious, every copy an act of preservation for future generations. The Great Road's sleeping affects not just the flow of goods and knowledge, but the movement of people themselves. The cosmopolitan cities that once welcomed travelers from every corner of the known world now exist in greater isolation. Languages that once mixed freely in marketplace conversations now remain more separate. Customs and traditions that once blended and evolved through constant contact now develop along more distinct lines. But even in this isolation, something beautiful emerges. Communities that once looked outward for their identity now discover their own unique character. Crafts that once competed with goods from across the world now flourish in their local distinctiveness. Stories that once mixed with tales from distant lands now develop their own regional flavor and depth. In the city of Kashgar, at the western edge of the Darim Basin, the weekly market still brings together Turkmen herders, Chinese farmers, and Tibetan traders. But the scale is more intimate now. Conversations last longer, relationships develop more deeply. Transactions are based on trust built over years, rather than the quick assessments necessary when dealing with constantly changing partners. Old merchant Buckshire, who has traded in this market for 40 years, knows the genealogies of the families he works with, can predict their needs based on the weather patterns of their regions, extends credit based on relationships that span generations. His business is smaller than it once was, but it is more deeply woven into the fabric of his community. The Great Road sleeps, but it does not die. Like a living thing resting through winter, it maintains its essential structure while adapting to changed circumstances. The pathways remain carved into the landscape, the wells still provide water, the caravanserai still offer shelter to those who brave the journey. And slowly, carefully, patiently, trade begins to flow again along these ancient routes. Not in the torrents of the past, but in the steady trickles of communities that have learned to value connection over mere commerce. As night falls across the vast expanse of the Silk Road, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the deserts of Central Asia, from the seaports of the Arabian Peninsula to the river valleys of China, a different kind of quiet settles over the landscape. Not the silence of death, but the hush of transformation, the peaceful breathing of a network that rests, that dreams, that slowly, gently, prepares for whatever form it will take. When the world is ready to reach across the distances, once again, in the caravanserai of distant Otrar, Mahmud tends his evening fire, knowing that tomorrow might bring travelers, or might bring only the wind, but ready either way, to offer shelter, to those who still dare, to journey toward the horizon where the Silk Road sleeps and dreams of morning. You find yourself standing on a gentle hill, overlooking a valley that stretches far into the distance. The morning sun casts long shadows across fields and villages. And something feels different about this landscape, something you can't quite name, but can feel in the very air around you. This is the year 1355. 6 years have passed since the worst of the great dying, and the world has been quietly, profoundly reshaped. Take a deep breath, and let your eyes wander across this peaceful scene. Below you, smoke rises from cottage chimneys, but not as many as there once were. The villages are smaller now, but somehow they seem more purposeful, more intentional, as if every remaining soul has found their place, their meaning, in this transformed world. You begin walking slowly down the hillside, your feet finding the familiar path worn smooth by generations of travelers. But even this path tells a story of change. Some of the old roads, the ones that once connected bustling market towns, are already growing over with grass, while new paths, leading to different destinations, are being carved by the footsteps of people moving toward fresh possibilities. As you walk, you pass a field where a young woman guides a plow behind a sturdy ox. Her movements are confident, practiced. This is work that once belonged only to men, but now necessity has opened doors that tradition had kept closed. She looks up as you pass, and her smile carries something new, a kind of pride, a knowledge of her own worth that wasn't there before. In the distance, you can hear the sound of hammering, the steady rhythm of construction. Not the frantic rebuilding after destruction, but something more thoughtful, more deliberate. People are building new kinds of homes, new kinds of communities, shaped by hard-won wisdom about what truly matters. You pause at a crossroads, where a small stone marker points toward 3 different villages. Once upon a time, this would have been a place of constant traffic, merchants and pilgrims and messengers hurrying back and forth, carrying goods and news and the endless business of a crowded world. Now, the traffic is lighter, but somehow more significant. The people you see traveling are moving with purpose. A family with their belongings loaded on a cart, not fleeing from something, but moving toward a new beginning. A group of craftsmen, their tools slung over their shoulders, heading to a town that has promised them fair wages and decent treatment. The plague, in its terrible passing, has given people something unexpected, the power to choose, to move, to seek better lives. Because when there are fewer people, suddenly, every person becomes precious. You follow the road toward the largest village in the valley, and as you draw closer, you can see that even the architecture is changing. The houses are built differently now, with larger windows, better ventilation, rooms designed for both work and living, as if people have learned, in the hardest way possible, that home is not just shelter, but sanctuary. The village square, when you reach it, bustles with activity, but it's a different kind of bustle than before. There's a market, yes, but the vendors are local farmers and craftspeople, selling their goods directly to their neighbors. The great merchant caravans that once dominated trade have given way to smaller, more personal exchanges. A baker sells bread still warm from his oven, and he knows the name of every customer. A weaver displays cloth dyed in colors drawn from local plants, and she can tell you the story of every pattern. This is commerce, but it's also community, trade that builds relationships rather than just profits. You settle on a wooden bench near the village well, and watch the daily life unfold around you. Children play games that would look familiar to you, but listen closely, and you can hear new songs, new stories born from the experiences their parents lived through. They sing about courage in the face of fear, about the importance of taking care of each other, about how the smallest act of kindness can light up the darkest day. These children, born after the plague, or too young to remember it clearly, are growing up in a world shaped by its passing. They take for granted freedoms that their grandparents never dreamed of. The daughter of a former serf plays alongside the son of a minor lord, because when survival is uncertain, old hierarchies seem less important than simple human connection. An old man joins you on the bench, his weathered hands folded over a walking stick. "I remember when this square was twice as crowded," he says softly, his voice carrying no sadness, only acceptance. "But I think we're happier now. We know each other's names. We share our troubles. We celebrate each other's joys." He points to a young couple walking hand in hand across the square. She was a lord's daughter. He was a blacksmith's apprentice. Before the plague, such a match would have been impossible. But now, he shrugs gently, now we understand that love, real love, is too precious to waste on the old rules. You thank the old man for his wisdom, and continue your journey through this reshaped world. As you walk, you notice how the very rhythm of life has changed. People move more slowly, more deliberately. They stop to talk with neighbors, to admire a garden, to pet a friendly dog. The frantic urgency that once drove daily life has given way to something more sustainable, more human. At the edge of the village, you come upon a new kind of building, part workshop, part school, where a master craftsman teaches not just his own children, but any young person eager to learn. The plague created so many gaps, so many missing links in the chain of knowledge, that communities have had to find new ways to pass on skills, to preserve wisdom, to nurture talent wherever it appears. Inside, you watch a teenage girl learning to work with metal, her concentration complete as she shapes a piece of iron on the anvil. Once, this knowledge would have been kept within families, passed from father to son. But necessity has opened these doors too, and the girl's work shows she has the hands and heart for this craft. You climb another hill, and from this new vantage point, you can see further, across valleys and forests, to other villages, other communities, each one adapting in its own way to the new realities. Some have become more agricultural, turning their attention to feeding their neighbors well. Others have specialized in particular crafts, becoming known for the finest pottery, or the warmest wool, or the most beautiful wood carving. The rigid uniformity that once characterized medieval society has given way to something more varied, more experimental. As if the plague, in breaking down the old certainties, has freed people to discover what they're truly good at, what brings them joy, what serves their communities best. A river winds through the valley below, and you can see that its course has been altered, not by the plague itself, but by the people who survived it. They've built new bridges, dug new channels, created mills and workshops powered by the flowing water. The landscape itself bears the marks of a society that has learned to work with nature rather than simply against it. Along the riverbank, gardens flourish, not the formal plots of manor houses, but community gardens where families share the work and the harvest, where children learn to tend plants alongside their lessons in reading and numbers, where the elderly pass on knowledge of which herbs heal, which combinations of crops grow best together, which signs in the sky predict the weather. As the day grows warmer, you make your way to a grove of old oak trees, where a small group has gathered for what looks like a lesson, or perhaps a discussion. A woman with silver hair sits on a fallen log, surrounded by people of various ages, all listening intently as she speaks. "The plague taught us many things," she's saying, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. But perhaps the most important was this, that we are all connected, that the health of one affects the health of all, that isolation is not protection, but community, true community, is our greatest strength. The listeners nod, some taking notes on pieces of bark or scraps of parchment. This is how knowledge spreads now, not through formal institutions alone, but through gatherings like this, where wisdom is shared freely, where everyone is both teacher and student. You continue your wandering, and come upon a sight that stops you. A young man and woman working together to build a house. But they're not working alone. Their neighbors have come to help, carrying stones, mixing mortar, raising beams, singing work songs that make the labor lighter. This is another gift of the reshaped world, the understanding that individual survival depends on collective thriving. The house they're building today will shelter this young family. But tomorrow, all these helpers will gather at another site, to build another home, to strengthen the community one dwelling at a time. The design of the house itself tells a story. It's larger than what a young couple might have afforded before, because there are fewer people competing for resources. But it's also simpler, built with local materials, designed to last, to shelter not just a family, but their contributions to the community. From this place, you can see the roads that connect this valley to the wider world. And on those roads, you glimpse the other changes that have rippled outward from the plague's passing. Smaller caravans, yes, but more frequent, carrying not just goods but ideas, innovations, stories of how different communities have solved similar problems. A group of travelers approaches, their cart loaded with books, precious hand-copied manuscripts, but also something new, wooden blocks carved with letters. The early experiments in printing that will soon revolutionize how knowledge spreads. The plague created such hunger for information, for connection, for ways to preserve and share hard-won wisdom, that innovation has flourished. They stop to water their horses at the village well, and within minutes, they're surrounded by curious locals, eager to hear news from other places, to learn about new techniques, new ideas, new possibilities. The isolation that once characterized medieval life has given way to a new kind of openness, a recognition that survival and growth require the free flow of knowledge. As evening approaches, you find yourself back on the hillside where you began. But now you're not alone. Others have come here too, drawn by the peace of this place, the long view it offers of the transformed world below. A family spreads a blanket and shares their evening meal, bread and cheese and early apples. Simple food made precious by gratitude, by the knowledge that having enough to share is a blessing not to be taken for granted. An elderly couple sits quietly, holding hands, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. They've survived the worst of times, and now they're witnessing something remarkable. The birth of a gentler world, built on the foundations of loss but reaching toward hope. You lie back on the soft grass and look up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars that shone down on the world before the plague. But somehow, they seem different now, part of a universe that feels more knowable, more connected, less dominated by fear and more open to wonder. The great dying has passed, but its lessons remain, woven into the fabric of daily life, into the way people treat each other, into the structures they build, the communities they create, the values they pass on to their children. This is the world reshaped, not by conquest or revolution, but by the quiet persistence of people who chose, again and again, to build something better from the pieces that remained. To create not just survival, but meaning, not just recovery, but transformation. And in that transformation, in that proof of human resilience and creativity and love, there is a peace that settles over the land, over the villages, over the people who call this valley home. A peace that whispers of possibilities, of tomorrows built on the wisdom of yesterday, of hope that grows strongest in the soil of experience. The world has been reshaped, and it is beautiful. And so, my dear friend, we have wandered together through the quiet corridors of a world transformed. From the first whispered rumors in distant ports, to the empty streets of once bustling cities, to the gentle rebuilding of communities that learned to treasure what remained. We have traced the path of how something invisible and silent reshaped the very foundations of human civilization. Take a moment now to let your mind drift back over this journey we've shared. The way it began with traders bringing strange tales from the east, their ships heavy with silk and spices, but carrying something far more transformative than any cargo they knew. Remember how slowly, almost gently, the great change crept across the landscape of the known world. Not with the thunder of armies or the drama of conquest, but with the quiet persistence of morning mist settling into valleys. We walked together through the emptying streets of Florence, where fountains continued to flow even when no one remained to hear their gentle music. We stood in the doorways of silent monasteries, where prayer books lay open to pages that would never be turned, where candles had burned down to pools of wax beside altars that waited for voices that would not come. We felt the profound stillness that settled over kingdoms where kings found themselves ruling subjects who existed now only in memory. But what strikes me most as we reach the end of this long, quiet tale is not the silence itself, but what grew from that silence. Not the emptiness, but what filled the emptiness. Not what was lost, but what was discovered in the losing. We witnessed the gentle rise of peasants who suddenly found their labor precious, their voices heard, their choices respected in ways their grandparents could never have imagined. We watched as artists, having stared into such profound darkness, began to create beauty with a tenderness and intimacy that previous generations had rarely achieved. We saw communities rebuild themselves not just with wood and stone, but with new understandings of what it means to care for one another. In the villages that slowly came back to life, we found people who had learned to treasure the simple miracle of sharing a meal, of waking to another sunrise, of hearing a child's laughter echo across a courtyard. The Great Plague had been a teacher, perhaps, in the way that only the deepest losses can teach, showing people the difference between what they thought they needed and what they actually needed to flourish. We followed the ancient trade routes as they transformed from rushing rivers of commerce into gentler streams of connection, where relationships mattered more than transactions, where the quality of goods became more important than their quantity. The Great Silk Road, sleeping under stars that had watched countless caravans pass beneath them, dreamed new dreams of what it might mean to connect distant peoples. Not just through the exchange of things, but through the sharing of wisdom, of stories, of the patient recognition that all human beings, regardless of the languages they speak or the gods they worship, share the same fundamental hopes and fears. The transformation we've witnessed together speaks to something profound about the nature of change itself. So often, we imagine that the great shifts in human history must come with fanfare, with dramatic moments that everyone can see and understand. But the plague years taught a different lesson, that the most fundamental changes often arrive quietly, almost invisibly, like seeds carried on the wind to take root in soil that seemed barren, but was actually just waiting for the right conditions to nurture new life. The world that emerged from the Great Silence was smaller in some ways. Fewer people, quieter cities, reduced trade networks. But it was also larger in others. Larger in heart, in understanding, in the depth of connection between those who remained. Communities that had been held together by habit and tradition found themselves bonded by something stronger. The shared recognition of how precious and fragile human connection truly is. We saw how the church, having lost so many of its priests and much of its unquestioned authority, began to evolve into something more intimate, more focused on comfort than judgment, more concerned with helping people navigate their daily struggles than with maintaining distant theological positions. Faith itself became more personal, more immediate, more grounded in the lived experience of people who had looked into darkness and chosen to continue believing in light. The political structures that survived learned to govern through cooperation rather than pure force, recognizing that when populations are smaller and more scattered, authority must be earned rather than simply assumed. Kings and nobles who adapted found themselves becoming genuine leaders rather than mere rulers, people who served their communities rather than simply exploiting them. Perhaps most remarkably, we witnessed the birth of a new kind of medicine, born not in universities or royal courts, but in the practical experience of people who had no choice but to learn how to care for one another. Healers like young Anna, who learned her craft during the darkest times, carried forward not just knowledge of herbs and remedies, but a deep understanding of how to comfort the afflicted, how to offer hope in the midst of fear, how to be present with people in their most vulnerable moments. The art that emerged from this transformed world carried within it qualities that would influence creativity for centuries to come. An intimacy with both loss and hope, a tenderness born of having stood at the edge of ending and chosen to create anyway. Musicians composed lullabies that could comfort those who woke from nightmares. Painters learned to capture the sacred in the everyday. Writers discovered stories that spoke directly to the heart of anyone who had ever grieved, ever feared, ever found unexpected strength in the midst of overwhelming darkness. And running through all of these changes, like a golden thread woven through a tapestry, was a new understanding of what it means to be fully human. The plague years stripped away many of the artificial distinctions that had divided people. Noble from peasant, learned from ignorant, powerful from powerless. What remained was the irreducible truth that every human life has value, that every person carries within them the capacity for both tremendous suffering and tremendous love, that the most important work any of us can do is simply to care for one another with whatever skill and tenderness we possess. As our journey together draws to its close, I want you to carry with you this gentle truth, that even in the darkest times, even when the world seems to be ending, even when everything familiar appears to be falling away, there are always seeds of renewal quietly taking root. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something we couldn't have imagined before. The Black Death was indeed one of history's greatest tragedies. Millions of lives cut short, communities destroyed, knowledge lost, dreams unfulfilled. We must never minimize the reality of that suffering or pretend that transformation somehow makes loss acceptable. But neither should we miss the remarkable story of how human beings, faced with unimaginable challenges, found ways to create meaning, to build connection, to choose hope even in the midst of despair. The world that emerged from the Great Silence still speaks to us across the centuries, reminding us that resilience is not about avoiding difficulty, but about learning to grow through it. That community is not a convenience, but a sacred trust. That beauty created in the aftermath of loss carries a special power to heal. That small acts of kindness, repeated daily, can reshape entire civilizations. So as you drift now towards sleep, let these gentle truths settle over you like a warm blanket. That change, even difficult change, often carries within it the seeds of renewal. That human beings have an extraordinary capacity to adapt, to care for one another, to find meaning even in the midst of suffering. That the most important transformations often happen quietly, almost invisibly, in the daily choices of ordinary people who decide to treat each other with dignity and love. The Great Plague passed, as all things pass, but the wisdom it taught, the connections it forged, the beauty it inspired, the compassion it awakened. These things echo still, whispering across the centuries that even after the deepest loss, even after the most profound silence, life finds a way to begin again. Gently, patiently, hopefully. Close your eyes now, my friend. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel yourself settling into that peaceful place between waking and sleeping, and know that you are part of an ancient story of resilience and renewal. A story that continues still, in every act of kindness, every moment of connection, every choice to create rather than destroy. Sleep well, dream gently, and wake tomorrow ready to add your own quiet chapter to the endless story of how human beings learn to care for one another across all the distances, through all the changes, with all the love they can possibly give. Until we meet again, in another quiet corner of history's gentle mysteries. Good night.